Car part suppliers are known for being under intense pressure to reach their quotas every single day. And the employees develop a sort of production at all costs mentality because they see their employer only cares about hitting their daily quota. And so employees will cut corners and skirt safety regulations to ensure they stay on their quota. Regina was a reserved and quiet kid. She landed a job as an assembly line worker at a car parts supplier factory. It was called Stange USA, and they supplied parts to Hyundai and to Kia. Regina was working the day shift at the factory. Her job that day was to oversee a robot that would weld on these metal pillars onto the front right and the front left of the car where the side view mirrors would attach to. This robot looked like a giant arm protruding from the ground, where at the end of the arm, where the hand would be, were two welding tips that stuck out about 4 inches each. The robot was surrounded by this huge chain link fence. Regina would oversee this robot via a computer screen outside of that cage. At some point in the afternoon, as Regina is monitoring her computer, it comes across the screen that there is a stud fault on Robot 23. Now, her robot was not Robot 23, but the person in charge of overlooking Robot 23 was a part of her team, and her team had a daily quota to hit. And so having Robot 23 down directly impacted Regina. After quite a while, maintenance still hadn't shown up, and it was obvious the team was getting very anxious. And so at some point, Regina just kind of says, I'm gonna fix the fault myself. And so she picks up a small tool that looks like a screwdriver. She opens up the cage to Robot 23, and she steps inside and walks right for the stem of the robot. When she gets over to it, she has her back to the robot's arm that's behind her, and she begins doing something with her tool to the stem of the robot. Whatever she does, it works because the robotic arm behind her springs into life and immediately goes back into the action it had been trying to perform before it failed. And that action involved swinging back in Regina's direction. And when it did, those two 4-inch welding tips at the end of the robotic arm were driven directly into Regina's back, impaling her. Her coworkers saw it happen and hit the emergency shutoff switch, but it didn't power down the robot until after it had thrust Regina across the cage and pinned her up against the wall. And so with this robot now powered down, the welding tips were now run all the way through her upper back and pressed up against the wall. She slouched over, but her eyes were wide open. She was conscious, but she didn't make a sound. Nobody knew how to release Regina from the robot's grasp. And so the team leader hopped on a forklift and sped across the factory floor towards the break room. He ran inside, he found a maintenance worker, and they sped back across the factory towards the Robot 23 cage. When they got there, they took this maintenance guy and basically thrust him into the cage and told him to get Regina out. But the maintenance worker didn't speak any English. He was terrified at what he was seeing Regina the way she was. He didn't really know how to fix the situation. Tempers were flaring, and before long, the maintenance worker just got overwhelmed and ran away. When emergency crews finally arrived several minutes later, Regina was still pinned by this robot. She was conscious, her eyes were wide open, and she was still totally silent. And they were able to get her off. They sent her to a hospital, and then she was transported to a trauma center, but it was too late. The damage that had been done to her was just too extensive, and she died at the hospital. It would turn out Regina's company, Agent, had not properly trained her or any of her coworkers. Agent's policy was to hire people and as fast as possible get them on the floor, helping them reach their quota. And so as a result, Regina and her team members had no idea about a so-called lockout procedure, where if you're going to go inside one of these robots' cages, you need to make sure the power switch has been locked out, meaning it will not turn back on if you fix the fault that has caused your robot to stop. All Regina and her coworkers knew is that the most important thing is hitting your quota at the end of the day. And so that was the reason Regina went inside of the cage, and that was the reason Regina was killed. Agent ultimately pleaded guilty to not having properly trained Regina, leading to her death, and they paid the family $1.5 million. Just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time that's gonna do it, see ya.